The first one is, going back to the previous slide, which we can't do, which we can do. The old one, how many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb? 3 answers to this one, surprisingly. It only takes 1 lawyer to change your light bulb to his light bulb. You won't find a lawyer who can change a light bulb. Now, if you're looking for a lawyer to screw a light bulb, well, the final one is the agreement. Bear with me on this one. Whereas the party to the first part, also known as lawyer, and the party to the second part, also known as light bulb, do hereby and forthwith agree to a transaction wherein the party of the second part, light bulb, shall be removed from the current position as a result of failure to perform previously agreed upon duties, i.e. lighting, elucidation and otherwise illumination of the area, ranging from the north front door through to the entryway, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You get the message. Why do sharks not kill lawyers? Nearly. Nearly. Professional courtesy. It's just too easy. What is the difference between a lawyer and a tick? Nearly. A tick will leave you after you die. What is the difference between a herd of buffaloes and a herd of lawyers? The lawyers charge more. Okay, and one which I quite like, which is a true example of a cross-examination by an American lawyer. You may have read this, it is quite a well-known joke. Attorney, doctor, before you performed the autopsy, did you check for a pulse? Witness, no. Attorney, did you check for blood pressure? Witness, no. Attorney, did you check for breathing? Witness, no. Attorney, so then is it possible that the patient was alive when you began the autopsy? Witness, no. Attorney, how can you be so sure, doctor? Witness, because his brain was sitting on my desk in a jar. Attorney, but could the patient still have been alive nevertheless? Witness, yes, it is possible that he could have been alive and practicing law. Going to move away from that subject because there's 18 pages of them. So what is mediation? Does anybody actually have a view about what mediation is? Help me out.
Try to bring 2 parties together.
Yes, that's right. Mediation is the process where the 2 disputing parties get the services of an independent, neutral mediator whose sole function is to try to help them to resolve their disputes. It can be carried out in parallel to litigation. The success rate of mediations is over 70%. I'm a mediator. I've done over 50 mediations in practice with a reasonable success rate. And in my experience, disputes often arise out of misunderstandings. It is conceivable that both parties will have exactly differing views about the same set of facts and genuinely hold those views. So this is the story of the orange. It's a famous mediation story. 2 kids in a playground are disputing who should have the orange. There's only one orange. And the teacher walks over and says to one of the kids, you know, why do you want the orange? And the kid says, well, I'm hungry, I want to eat it. And the teacher says to the other kid, you know, why do you want the orange? And he says, oh, I need the peel because we've got a cooking lesson today and we need it for our ingredients. So they could both get the objectives that they wanted through effectively a small piece of mediation. They're about to come to fisticuffs. And that's what mediation does. It works on maximizing the outcomes of a dispute for both the parties. If you're in dispute, you know, you're never going to be happy, but if you can be happier than you would going through the court then and resolving it early, that's what mediation is about. There are, in my opinion, quite a few advantages about mediation. It's quicker. So the cost of mediation is, mediation can be organised literally in a week, 7 days, 2 weeks if you really wanted to. There's plenty of mediation organisations out there who are ready to provide mediators. A court case in the High Court will take you probably 6 to 18 months to get to trial. So mediation is much, much quicker. It's also cheaper. If you've had a litigation case, you'll all groan about the costs of taking it all to court. I think Moss groaning in particular. Mediation can be arranged for a few £100s. A very top mediator will still only cost between £1,000 and £2,000 for the whole day. A top QC will cost you £10,000 to £15,000 for the whole day. It's more flexible, and the parties can reach whatever terms they want to at the end of the mediation, so they can actually make their own contract. If you go to court, you'll get a judgment on the issues before the court. If you go to mediation, literally, you can construct whatever agreement you want to, and this can actually help parties continue to work together even though they've got disputes. It's private and confidential, so it's entirely off the record. It creates a little bubble outside the litigation. Nothing that you learn at the mediation can be used in the litigation. This encourages the parties to actually talk about what's really on their minds, and mediators are trained to try and find out what the parties really want to achieve from the day. And very often it's very different to what you think it is or what's written down on the official papers. The involvement at the parties in a mediation is key. If you've ever been to a mediation, you'll get company directors there, you'll get finance directors. These are people that if they go through the court process, they just stand at the back of the court. They have to give their witness evidence. The witness evidence must comply with their written witness statement, otherwise they'll get into trouble on credibility. Then they go to the back of the court, then they have no real control over the process. In a mediation, they're the ones talking to the mediator the whole day, and business people are interesting people because they don't want to waste their time. They're not going to come to a mediation and spend all day, which is valuable for them, if they don't input. And they are, funnily enough, natural problem solvers. That's how they became MDs and FDs. So their involvement in the process is pretty key, and even if you don't settle, you're going to have a good look at the real issues in the case, and so it may well settle shortly after the mediation. And therefore, if you get to a solution, you save considerable time, which is valuable these days to business people, not so much to Rotarians, I mean, yes, very valuable to Rotarians, and legal costs. The savings on mediation can be as much as £10,000 or thousands of pounds saved per party, and you'll get then a court order which will bring the litigation to a conclusion. So, just to share with you a few of my personal experiences of mediation in practice, and these are situations that I've been in either as a mediator or as a lawyer. I've got to be a bit generic because I'm on camera. So, first one is phone a friend. We had a mediation down in Kent, and it was early in the morning, and the householder, it was a surveyor who was claiming his fees, and the householder had stuck him, we were outside in the annex, and the householder was upstairs with his friend in the nice warm place with lots of coffee, and the surveyor had been stuck downstairs in the garage, which was more or less open, had no heating. So after a while we made sure that he was moved upstairs because it's part of the mediator's job to keep a level playing field, and he actually said, yeah, I was just about to walk off, so that was the first good move. And then at the end of the day, we were getting towards a settlement, and the guy just turned around and said, the surveyor just turned around and said, well, look, thanks very much. I'd heard about mediation, so I came today to see what it was like, but I didn't really want to settle, so, thanks for trying. It was quite galling because we'd had to get up even earlier than this to get down to Kent. Lovely place, Kent. And so I thought Mastermind was quite big at the time. Mastermind? I've got that wrong. I think it was Mastermind. And I said, well, look, why don't you call a friend? Because the other guy's up there with his representative. He's got the benefit of two people being here all day. You're on your own. You're not necessarily, you've made decisions, but we've got to this point. Why don't you phone your wife? And that was quite a risky thing to do because normally people outside of mediation are not very good influences on the mediation because they've not been there during the day, and they'll make an opinion based on what they've previously been told about the case. Anyway, he's phoned his wife, and he must have gone on about the case quite a lot because she was quite keen for him to settle it. So he came back and we bridged the gap. So that was an example of real flexibility within mediation. The next one is what I call taxi to Heathrow. It was a mediation at our offices, and one of the parties was the paying party. So you got a party, basically two people representing the same side, but one of them was writing the cheques, and he had to go and catch a train in the middle of the afternoon. We all knew that, but he seemed to start packing his bags up about half an hour early, which was quite distressing. And he was obviously one of these people who's just going to walk out, because some people do walk out because they like doing that. It makes them feel better. Check he's still awake on this one. So he packed his bag, started walking down the stairs. So I literally either had to let it go. I ended up walking parallel down the stairs with him, talking to him, trying to get authority to carry on with the mediation in his absence. He got into his car. He had to wind the window down while the engine was already on, warming up. And he did then finally sort of talk to me and give me the authority I needed to go back and complete the mediation on his behalf. So that was a weird situation. Another one I had years ago was the Sicilian wine importers. So I was representing somebody who imported wine from Sicily. I was quite young at the time, so I didn't realise the implications of all of that. Just took the case on anyway. We went to a mediation in London, and there was a big round table, because you're supposed to have round tables on mediation. And because I was a bit late, the only place to sit was right next door to what I call the head honcho over from Sicily, which I realised why that was an empty place. And we mediated quite hard for most of the day, and there were proceedings in Italy as well, parallel proceedings. So mid-afternoon, we've got the mediator in one room, we've got the lawyers with the mediator talking about how to sign off these Italian proceedings. We've got the two Italian experts on Italian law in the other room trying to see if they've got any common ground. And the only people who are unattended are my clients and what I call the barone. So my client walks into the barone and says, we have to settle this, don't we? And the barone says, yeah, we do, because he had to save face, but don't quote me on that. And they reached an agreement. They came in to all the lawyers who were huddling around and said, we've settled it. And so we said, oh, very good, you've taken my job away. And we said, what were the terms? And we negotiated terms. We then took 2 hours to write up the mediation agreement because it was quite complicated. He then took us to an Italian restaurant at 12 o'clock at night in Bayswater or somewhere. And it was a thoroughly good day and a good example of the way that mediation can work, i.e. the parties settling their own disputes. Another one is what I call walk in the park. This was a mediation I conducted in a Oxford college. Quite a nice Oxford college, I won't name it. Actually, I will. Wolfson. Anybody been there? Yes. And they've got some marvellous pictures of 100 successful ladies in the world, portrait gallery. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's really good. And it was to do with pollution of spring water. So you buy your natural water, and as far as the claimants were concerned, it may as well have been tap water, allegedly. And the trading standards people have got involved as well. So the defendant was in some hot water. One of the parties turned up late for the mediation because they come across from quite a long way away. And we had the opening session. I haven't explained mediation sessions. I meant to. Basically, you have an opening session to start with where the parties sit opposite each other. They summarise their case to each other across the table. It's always an interesting dynamic to see how they're getting on. After that time, normally they'll go back to their separate rooms, and the mediator will then do shuttle diplomacy between them for the rest of the day. So that's the normal process for mediation in a nutshell. So on this occasion, the lawyers were spitting at each other, as usual. Nobody was getting on with each other. They all seemed to be in a bad mood, except the guy who was under the cosh and a representative from the other side, i.e. the party who'd been aggrieved. And they were actually nodding and said hello to each other, which I was surprised about because they're on completely opposite sides of this dispute and spending a lot on legal fees. So I said to them, why don't you have a chat privately? Because I couldn't see this resolving any other way, the way the lawyers were glaring at each other. And they went off and they had a walk around the college grounds, and it was down by the Charwell. And they were away for about an hour and a half. And I knew it was good news, but they came back and said, well, we have reached terms. And I said, well, great, go and tell your lawyers that and make sure they don't dissuade you from settling. And again, that settled. And that was a classic example of the risks that you can take in mediation. I know other mediators who, one lady I came across tried to mediate a whole dispute without actually talking. Could be difficult. And then finally, what I call a crying disaster. It was a mediation I did recently. We did it on Skype, and it was to do with a failed or a disappointed wedding arrangement. So this poor girl had had a terrible time in terms of trying to get, the wedding of her dreams abroad in Spain. Cut a long story short, the police had sort of closed down the outdoor activities and made them all go inside, and there was lots of other disasters. But we mediated for 2 hours. Now, I'd spoken to them before, and for an hour and a half, this lady talked about her, what had gone wrong. So it's an hour and a half, the wedding organizer had to sit there and listen to this lady talking about everything that had gone wrong. But I knew that's what she wanted to hear because she didn't understand the full facts. So we'd only got half an hour for negotiations, but because we'd done the groundwork, when we did get round to the negotiations, the money offered wasn't huge, but it didn't really matter because, she'd ventilated her concern. It had been, the lady from the wedding planners had respected them. And, the money then became less important and they reached a settlement. And that's another good example. At the end of the mediation, I had 4 people, 2 in the office, 2 on Skype, who were crying at each other, and it was all really very emotional and a good example of, in my opinion, how mediations can operate. And everybody felt much happier and relationships were restored to a certain extent. So, those are my personal experiences of some mediations. So briefly then, I've discussed the pros and cons of litigation and mediation and shared a few of my awkward experiences with you. In my opinion, litigation has been enhanced by mediation. Both processes have a part to play in dispute resolution. The reputation of litigation is sadly slightly tarnished in this country, but not abroad. And the reputation of mediation is still pretty much intact. And to my mind, the process shows considerable promise to be a cheaper and more flexible way of settling disputes of all sizes without litigation. And I know that the government thinks that as well, because lawyers cynically will say that they're actually trying to replace litigation with mediation. That's not going to work. You need litigation to enforce your rights. When I was a trainee, I went up to London, and there was a husband who had kidnapped his child. As a trainee, I popped up to London in front of Lord Heilbronn. Didn't really know what I was doing, but she knew what I wanted. She actually gave me this order that was then had a power of arrest attached. The tipstaff had already arrested the guy by the time I got back to Watford. So litigation has its place and always will have, and the concept of justice will always have its place. In the UK, mediation isn't about justice. You need to understand that mediation is about resolving disputes. So, I don't think I've got much time left, but maybe if I can invite you to have quick questions and answers about anything that you've heard today, which include litigation or mediation or this wonderful longest Rotary meeting ever. I'm happy to take a question or two about that. And if you don't ask questions, I will continue to read out jokes about lawyers, because otherwise this longest Rotary meeting ever will come to a grinding halt. So thank you for listening. Yep, question.
I've got 2 comments actually.
Okay.
I'm delighted to come here this morning so early and discover the first speaker was actually my lawyers. I was not expecting that. And you've alluded to the reputation that lawyers sometimes have. And all I can say is, with regard to BP Collins, you provide a fantastic service. I've used you over the last 5 years on several different issues, including mediation.
Okay.
But it never got to this sort of level that you were discussing this morning. And the reason I'm saying that, and he hasn't paid me to say this, by the way, we've never met before.
But you will get a discount.
Because of course, when Paul Harris started Rotary, it started off as a business networking organisation, and the humanitarian service came afterwards. And I think we've lost sight of that. So I'm absolutely delighted to find that in my company of lawyers, we have a very able, professional, and interesting and amusing lawyer. And the other thing I would say is that
he couldn't make it.
You've talked about mediation and conflict resolution, which of course is at the heart of one of Rotary's most important programs, which is the Rotary Peace Centres. We train students, Rotary pays for students to go to the Rotary Peace Centres to develop very well-developed skills in mediation, conflict resolution, in areas of the world where there is conflict, and at the moment there are lots of those. And this year, in June, we're going to be having the 1,000 graduates, postgraduates, coming out of the Rotary Peace Centres. And it's interesting, the skills are exactly the same as you described this morning.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the most interesting talk.
Thank you for your most interesting comment. Yes, sir.
In two of your examples, it looks as if the lawyers may have scuppered the process of mediation. As a lawyer, in your wide experience, obviously you won't mention the bad cases, but in your experience, do lawyers interfere with the mediation process more than resolve it?
That's an interesting question. The answer is that...
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. Can I repeat the question? I'll try and summarise it. But yeah, the question is, from my experience, do or can lawyers derail the process, is what you're asking me. And in my experience, it depends on who the lawyers are, and it depends on who the barristers are. In my experience, and I'm generalising, younger barristers tend to understand the process. They've been better trained and they're more amenable to... I mean, the white elephant in the room is that if you settle a mediation, you're depriving yourself of fees. Never a great thing to do when you're a professional. The theory is that then you're settling it more efficiently, so people come to litigation more using. In my experience, some lawyers can is the answer, and some lawyers, most lawyers don't. It is a risk if you separate the lawyer from the client. I personally, apart from the case I've said where it was instinctive, I wouldn't do that because understandably there's breach of trust and confidence between the lawyers. So, but in my experience, lawyers are becoming more knowledgeable and they're better able to at least engage in mediation. I don't think you can ever predict the outcome of a mediation because it may not be suitable to settle. You're only really going to settle if you can beat what you think you're going to get at court, and if both sides or either side think they're not going to do that, they won't settle because it's a voluntary process. But people are very much more enlightened than they used to be. There are some old dinosaurs out there, you have to be careful about them. And there are some out there, including me. I'm rattling on. That's right. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.